G'day, I'm Garry Stevens, and welcome to the second series of the History in the Bible podcast. More of the history in more of the books in all the Bibles. Episode 2.57 Paul's Arrest and Trial. In episode 2.55, Paul's third mission to the Galatians, Paul concluded his final mission with a valedictory speech in the Asian city of Miletus. Paul dreads his future. Quote, Acts 20:22. And now, as a captive to the Spirit, I am on my way to Jerusalem, not knowing what will happen to me there, except that the Holy Spirit testifies to me in every city that imprisonment and persecutions are waiting for me. And now I know that none of you will ever see my face again. End quote. Paul took ship on a voyage that disembarked him at Tyre in the province of Syria. A few days later he was back in Jerusalem. Most scholars place Paul's return to the year 57. The final act in Paul's life occupies almost a third of the book of Acts. According to Paul himself, this is his third visit to Jerusalem. Acts declares it to be his fifth. Paul must have expected a frigid welcome from James. Paul complains endlessly about missionaries from the Jerusalem Club of James, the circumcision party, interfering with his own clubs. James was a continual vexation to Paul. James had known Jesus in a way that Paul could not hope to challenge. James probably thought that his brother/cousin Jesus was a Jewish prophet, come to turn errant Jews from their wicked ways. Paul's conversion of pagans was irrelevant at best and blasphemous at worst. Paul had a much more cosmic and cosmopolitan view, one that embraced Gentiles. James quite possibly thought that Paul was a complete nutjob. To his surprise, Paul is greeted warmly by the Jerusalem Club. Paul regales the club with his triumphs amongst the Gentiles. James puts on his best happy face at this grand news, while quietly seething at Paul's every word. James soon drops the facade. He turns on Paul. Quote, Acts 21:20. James said to him, You see, brother, how many thousands of believers there are among the Jews, and they are all zealous for the law. They have been told about you, that you teach all the Jews living among the Gentiles to forsake Moses, and that you tell them not to circumcise their children or observe the customs. This is an outrageous charge. Paul's letters show us that Paul insisted that the Jewish followers of Jesus preserve their ancient laws and practices. James doubles down. He demands that Paul apologize to Jewish members of the Jerusalem Club, and that Paul demonstrate his loyalty to the law. And a grand way to do that is to pay for the purification rites of 4 Nazarites. Nazarites took vows of holiness and abstention. The best known examples from the Old Testament are Samson and Samuel. Okay, maybe Samson is not the best example. For more on that homicidal halfwit, rewind to my episode 1.27, Judges 2, Victory into Defeat. Here James speaks. Quote, Acts 21:22. What then is to be done? So do what we tell you. We have 4 men who are under a vow. Go through the rite of purification with them, and pay for the shaving of their heads. Thus all will know that there is nothing in what they have been told about you, but that you yourself observe and guard the law. Then Paul took the men, and the next day he entered the temple with them making public the completion of the days of purification." End quote. James has humiliated Paul in the most calculating way. But there is more. The book of Acts many times recounts the generous alms flowing from the Christian outreach movement in pagan lands to the Jerusalem Club. The money never flows the other way. Jerusalem provides no support to the other Jesus clubs. The disciples in Judea never lack for funds, and they never lack for deacons and presbyters, unpaid workers. As I recounted in episode 2.50, the first Jesus Club 2, Tribulations, the disciples had long ago redefined themselves as executives, far above the hoi polloi. Their job was to pray in the temple, not to wait on tables, as the book of Acts says. In stark contrast, Paul in his letters makes a real point of declaring that he is no sponger. Wherever he goes, Paul works as a tradesman to pay his own way. He asks not a denarius for himself or for his clubs. To rub salt into the wound, James, the well-heeled chief executive officer of the Jerusalem Club, demands that Paul, a common labourer, pay for his own humiliation. Now, I am not at all sure that this account in the book of Acts is reliable. Really, does Paul's submission to James sound like the Paul who wrote this in his letter to the Galatians? Quote, Galatians 2:11. "But when Peter came to Antioch, I opposed him to his face. For until certain people came from James, he used to eat with the Gentiles. But when I saw that they were not acting consistently with the truth of the gospel, I said to Peter before them all, 'If you, though a Jew, live like a Gentile and not like a Jew, how can you compel the Gentiles to live like Jews?'" End quote. In his letters, Paul is a vociferous opponent of the Jesus Club. The Paul of the letters would have told James to stick his ideas up his backside. We'll never know the truth. After Paul has, supposedly, completed the penance demanded by James, Paul finds himself in yet more strife. Quote, Acts 21:27. "The Jews stirred up the whole crowd. They seized Paul, shouting, 'Fellow Israelites, help! This is the man who is teaching everyone, everywhere, against our people, our law, and this place. More than that, he has actually brought Greeks into the temple and has defiled this holy place.' Then all the city was aroused, and the people rushed together. They seized Paul and dragged him out of the temple. While they were trying to kill him, word came to the tribune Claudius that all Jerusalem was in an uproar." End quote. These are similar to the charges laid against Stephen, Christianity's second martyr. To refresh yourself about Stephen's trial and death, rewind to my episode 2.50, the first Jesus Club Part 1, Tribulations. In the pandemonium, Paul is saved by the timely arrival of a cohort of Roman peacekeepers, led by the tribune Claudius Lysias. Claudius was the chief enforcer of the Roman procurator of the time, Marcus Antonius Felix. Claudius has seen this sort of thing many times before. Jews rioting against other Jews. Why can't they all just get along? The Romans would see it many times again. A decade after Paul was saved by Claudius Lysias, the Jews revolted against Rome. When the legions arrived beneath the walls of Jerusalem in the year 70, the city was stoutly defended by a gaggle of Jewish partisan groups. The Romans sat patiently outside the walls, while the partisans furiously turned on each other. This self-inflicted Judean terror ravaged the besieged city. After 6 months of murder, starvation, and mob rule, the Romans leisurely built siege towers against the walls and stoned the ravaged Temple Mount. Paul's incident is typically described as a Roman arrest. Not really. To save Paul from a lynching, the Romans have placed Paul into protective custody. Paul appeals to Claudius. Quote, Acts 21:37. Just as Paul was about to be brought into the barracks, he said to the tribune, "May I say something to you?" The tribune replied, "Do you know Greek? Then you are not the Egyptian who recently stirred up a revolt and led the 4,000 assassins out into the wilderness." End quote. Who is this Egyptian? The historian Josephus supplies the answer. Quote from Josephus, "There came out of Egypt one that said he was a prophet, and advised the common people to go along with him to the Mount of Olives. He said that he would show them how the walls of Jerusalem would fall down. Now when Procurator Felix was informed of these things, he ordered his soldiers against them, and attacked the Egyptian. He also slew 400 of them, and took 200 alive. But the Egyptian himself escaped out of the fight, but did not appear any more." End quote. The Egyptian's name is unknown to both Josephus and the book of Acts. His identity was blown by the desert winds into oblivion. The tribune Claudius is relieved that Paul is not the mysterious Egyptian, who so vexed his master, the procurator Felix. Claudius reluctantly grants Paul leave to address the angry Jews. You can see Claudius rolling his eyes. Paul is testing the tribune's patience. Paul is only alive because the Romans protect him. Now he wants to confront the crowd again? This man is a death wish. Paul delivers the fourth great speech recorded in Acts, and he does so to the Jewish crowd. That goes down like a prawn risotto and a pork roast at a bar mitzvah. Claudius decides that Paul is a suicidal, inflammatory provocateur who can't help but breach the public peace. Claudius dispatches Paul to the Antonia fortress, just to get him out of his hair. The Antonia was a Roman fort abutting the temple, originally built by Herod the Great. Paul has broken no Roman law, but he is a gargantuan pain in the backside. Now Paul reveals his superpower. He is a Roman citizen. Neither in Acts nor in any of his letters does Paul ever oppose Roman supremacy. To the contrary, Paul revels in the imperial protections it provides him. Quote, Acts 22:24. The tribune Claudius ordered him to be examined by flogging. I love that, examined by flogging. But when they had tied him up, Paul said to the centurion, "Is it legal for you to flog a Roman citizen?" The centurion spoke to the tribune. The tribune came and asked Paul, "Tell me, are you a Roman citizen?" And he said, "You bet." The tribune answered, "It cost me a large sum of money to get my citizenship." Paul said, "But I was born a citizen." Immediately those who were about to examine him drew back from him, and the tribune also was afraid. Since the tribune wanted to find out what Paul was being accused of by the Jews, the next day he released Paul and ordered the chief priests and the entire council to meet. He brought Paul down and had him stand before them. End quote. Paul has declared himself a Roman citizen, and so subject to Roman jurisdiction alone. Yet Tribune Claudius dispatches Paul to the Jewish council. Why? Nothing about this story rings true. Paul is arraigned on charges laid by the Jewish mob, that Paul taught against the Jews and brought Greeks into the temple. The council, it seems, knows nothing of those allegations. Instead, the council accuses Paul of defaming the high priest. Where did that come from? The proceedings rapidly move from confusing to crazy. Paul says nothing in his defence against the charges made by the mob, nor the defamation charge made by the council. Instead, he defends himself against accusations that no one has made. His belief in the resurrection of the dead. The Pharisees also believed in the resurrection of the dead. And to the Pharisees, Paul now turns. Quote, Acts 23:6. When Paul noticed that some were Sadducees and others were Pharisees, he called out in the council, Brothers, I am a Pharisee, a son of Pharisees. I am on trial concerning the hope of the resurrection of the dead. When he said this, a dissension began between the Pharisees and the Sadducees, and the assembly was divided. Then a great clamour arose, and the Pharisees stood up and contended. We find nothing wrong with this man. What if a spirit or an angel has spoken to him? When the dissension became violent, the tribune, fearing that they would tear Paul to pieces, ordered the soldiers to bring him into the barracks. End quote. Sometimes I wonder, there's so much unlikely about this story. Is the author of Acts just making it up as he goes along? For a second time, Tribune Claudius takes Paul into protective custody in the Antonia fortress. Paul's homicidal opponents, presumably only the Sadducees, can't reach him there. Twirling their moustaches, the Jewish plotters devise a dastardly plan. They convince the Sanhedrin to ask Tribune Claudius to send Paul back to the council for further interrogation. The plotters intend to assassinate Paul en route from the Antonia. Paul is saved by a surprise guest star. Paul's nephew comes to the rescue. Quote, Acts 23:16. Now the son of Paul's sister heard about the ambush. So he went and gained entrance to the fortress and told Paul. Paul called one of the centurions and said, Take this young man to the tribune, for he has something to report to him. So the centurion took him, brought him to the tribune, and said, The prisoner Paul called me and asked me to bring this young man to you. The tribune asked, What is it that you have to report to me? He answered, The Jews have agreed to ask you to bring Paul down to the council tomorrow. But do not be persuaded by them, for more than 40 of their men are lying in ambush for Paul. End quote. Luke wrote the book of Acts around the year 100, give or take. He never bothered to uncover the name of Paul's nephew. It is entirely possible that the nephew was still alive in that year. He would have been a jaunty 60 or so years of age. Luke really should have made the effort to reach out to Paul's family. It was the least he could do for posterity. Bad Luke. Tribune Claudius clearly has a soft spot for Paul. He unhesitatingly accepts the nephew's fears. Claudius dispatches Paul with a very substantial Roman bodyguard to Judea's head honcho, Procurator Marcus Antonius Felix. Felix resides in the Roman capital of the province, Caesarea Maritima, on the Mediterranean coast. That was 90 kilometres or 55 miles northwest of Jerusalem. Perhaps a 10-day walk for someone of Paul's age. Claudius explains himself to the procurator. Quote, Acts 23:26. Claudius Lysias, to His Excellency, the Governor Felix, greetings. This man was seized by the Jews and was about to be killed by them. But when I had learned that he was a Roman citizen, I rescued him. Since I wanted to know the charge for which they accused him, I had him brought to their council. I found out that he was accused concerning questions of their law, but was charged with nothing deserving death or imprisonment. When I was informed that there would be a plot against the man, I sent him to you at once." End quote. Our best guess is that Felix was procurator from 52 to the late 50s. That doesn't help us to date Paul's arrest with any precision. Marcus Antonius Felix was typical of the third-rate bureaucrats governing third-rate provinces. Felix was not born into an aristocratic senatorial family. He was not born into a bourgeois family, in the caste called the Equites. Felix was the son of a slave. He owed his position to his brother's good graces with the Emperor Claudius. Son of a slave becomes a Roman procurator. Success story? No. According to our old friend Josephus, Felix turned Judea into a criminal state. Felix was cruel and corrupt. He was licentious. He demanded bribes at every turn. He ran protection rackets. He used the notorious Sicarii as his enforcers. He conspired to assassinate the high priest. By night and by day, good citizens were assaulted by gangs and assassins. Greeks attacked Jews, and Jews assaulted Greeks. Judea was a province in merry hell. Felix was the worst possible Roman governor you could imagine. He faced prosecution upon his return to Rome after years of maladroit rule. He was again saved by his brother, who convinced the new emperor Nero to drop the charges. Felix, lucky in name, lucky in life. Paul must have feared the worst when he found Felix as his trial judge. At the trial, we finally hear of the precise charges the Jews are laying against Paul. The high priest Ananias has lawyered himself up with one Tertullus and travelled to Caesarea Maritima to present the prosecution. We have no idea if Tertullus was Jewish or Gentile. We don't know if the trial was conducted in Latin or Greek. Tertullus puts his case. Quote, Acts 24:4. I beg you to hear us briefly. We have in fact found this man a pestilent fellow, an agitator among all the Jews throughout the world, and a ringleader of the sect of the Nazarenes. He even tried to profane the temple, and so we seized him. By examining him yourself, you will be able to learn from him concerning everything of which we accuse him. End quote. Felix has no interest in the charge of profaning the temple. That's a purely Jewish matter. Felix is much more interested in the charge of agitation. Paul replies to the accusations in the 5th great speech recorded in the book of Acts. Paul calls his movement the Way, meaning the right way to be a Jew. He uses a Greek word you could translate as party. Josephus used the same word to describe the Essenes, Sadducees and Pharisees. Acts 24:12. The Jews did not find me disputing with anyone in the temple, or stirring up a crowd. Neither can they prove to you the charge that they now bring against me. But this I admit to you, that according to the way, which they call a party, I worship the God of our ancestors, believing everything laid down according to the law. I have a hope in God, a hope that they themselves also accept, that there will be a resurrection of both the righteous and the unrighteous. Now, after some years, I came to bring alms to my nation and to offer sacrifices." End quote. Paul claims he has done nothing wrong. To the contrary, he has adhered to Jewish ways, sacrificed as his religion demands, brought charitable donations to his people, and followed the rites of purification. Paul is a good and a righteous Jew, just like the Essenes, Sadducees or Pharisees. Marcus Antonius Felix hems and haws. He locks Paul up, no doubt in the expectation that Paul's friends will deliver a donkey load of denarii to discharge him. Felix never saw those denarii. 2 years after Paul's arrest, Felix was replaced by Porcius Festus, a man of whom we know almost nothing. Paul was still awaiting trial in Caesarea Maritima. From changes in the coinage of the time, most scholars believe that Porcius began his term between 58 and 60. Josephus claims that Porcius died early in his term, in 61 or 62. At least that gives us an anchor for the next chapter in Paul's life, his second trial before a Roman procurator. Quite aware of the chaos that Felix had bequeathed him, Porcius made his first order of business a trip to Jerusalem. The procurators seldom visited the Jewish capital. Once again, the Jewish leaders asked for Paul to be sent back to Jerusalem. And once again, that is just a pretext to ambush Paul. Their previous attempt had been foiled by Paul's nephew and the vigilance of the tribune Claudius Lysias. Porcius is having none of it. If the Jewish authorities want to try Paul, they must do so in Caesarea Maritima. Quote, Acts 25:6. Porcius took his seat on the tribunal and ordered Paul to be brought. When he arrived, the Jews who had gone down from Jerusalem surrounded him, bringing many serious charges against him, which they could not prove. Paul said in his defence, "I have in no way committed an offence against the law of the Jews, or against the temple, or against the emperor." But Festus, wishing to do the Jews a favour, asked Paul, "Do you wish to go up to Jerusalem and be tried there before me on these charges?" Paul said, "I am appealing to the emperor's tribunal. This is where I should be tried. I have done no wrong to the Jews. I appeal to the emperor." Then Festus replied, "You have appealed to the emperor. To the emperor you will go." Porcius grants what the corrupt Felix would not: a journey to Rome for trial as a Roman citizen before the emperor. Enter now for a cameo appearance, King Herod Agrippa II. The Emperor Claudius had installed Herod Agrippa's father, the first of that name, as king of Judea and Samaria 15 years before. Hear all about that in episode 2.50, The First Jesus Club, Part 2, Tribulations. When Herod Agrippa I suddenly died, in a rather gruesome fashion, Claudius decided that Agrippa's teenage son, second of that name, was too young for the job. Claudius took control of the region. When the lad became of age, Agrippa II was granted some modest territories in the region, and the right to appoint the high priests of the temple. The governors of Syria and their subordinates, the Roman procurators of Judea, were firmly in control of the Jewish heartland. They had been since the death of Herod the Great 55 years earlier. Herod Agrippa II was left to maintain the Jewish law, expend large sums in beautifying Jerusalem, and renovate the temple. The capricious manner in which he appointed and deposed the high priests endeared him to no one. Rumours spread that he lived incestuously with his sister Berenice. Herod Agrippa II attended the new procurator Porcius at Caesarea Maritima, perhaps as a courtesy, perhaps for entertainment. Porcius invited Herod Agrippa II to hear the prisoner Paul speak. The author of Acts is drawing parallels with Jesus' interrogation before the council, his interrogation before Pontius Pilate, and his interrogation before Herod Antipas, Herod Agrippa II's great uncle. Paul delivers his sixth and final speech to Porcius and Herod Agrippa. This is pure theatre. Paul is to be judged in Rome. Neither the procurator nor the king have any say in Paul's fate. Both are sympathetic to Paul, but know that Paul himself has taken the decision out of their hands. Paul begins his speech by declaring himself a Pharisee, the strictest sect of his people. For the third time in the book of Acts, he recounts the heavenly vision that turned him into a Jesus fan. Quote, Acts 26:19. After that, King Agrippa, I was not disobedient to the heavenly vision, but declared in Jerusalem and also to the Gentiles that they should repent and turn to God and do deeds consistent with repentance. For this reason the Jews seized me in the temple and tried to kill me. To this day I have had help from God, and so I stand here, testifying to both small and great, saying nothing but what the prophets and Moses said would take place, that the Messiah must suffer, and that, by being the first to rise from the dead, he would proclaim light both to our people and to the Gentiles. Paul is proud that he adheres to the law of Moses and the prophets. Luke has Paul say that the Messiah was prophesied to suffer. Paul says no such thing in his letters. For more on the suffering Messiah, why not listen to episode 2.4, Leaving Babylon Part 2, Cyrus and the Mystery of Sheshbazzar. Porcius Festus interrupts. Quote, Acts 26:24. Festus exclaimed, You are out of your mind, Paul. Too much learning is driving you insane. But Paul said, I am not out of my mind, most excellent Festus, but I am speaking the sober truth. Indeed, the king knows about these things, and to him I speak freely. King Agrippa, do you believe the prophets? I know that you believe. Agrippa said to Paul, Are you so quickly persuading me to become a Christ follower? Paul replied, I pray to God that not only you, but also all who are listening to me today might become such as I am, except for these chains. Then the king got up, and with him the governor and Bernice. And as they were leaving, they said to one another, This man is doing nothing to deserve death or imprisonment. Agrippa said to Festus, This man could have been set free if he had not appealed to the emperor. End quote. In the next episode, I follow the book of Acts to its conclusion, and the apostles to their fates. See you then. Thanks for listening. For maps, charts, and diagrams, check out my website, www.historyinthebible.com.